Across the church in America today, a new movement is rising where faith leads finance and clarity drives impact. I'm Roger Argonaldo, the founder of the Catholic Faith Investors Summit and the Catholic FI Alliance, a membership community of investors focused on faith-based investing aligned with Catholic social teaching. Join the leaders transforming stewardship into mission. This is where faithful investing begins and the future of Catholic investment takes shape. This is a fireside chat from the 2025 Catholic Faith Investors Summit in October 2025 in New York City. This fireside chat covers the USCCB guidelines, the U.S. Bishop's call for socially responsible investing, with Nick Gentile from the Knights of Columbus Asset Advisors in conversation with Steve Nelson from Faith Investor Services.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. One of the people I'd like to recognize is Dennis Hammond from First Trust. He wrote a really powerful document, I think, on both the USCCB guidelines and Mensurum Bonum. And I refer to it quite a bit. And he talks in the USCCB about having three investment strategies. Obviously avoiding harm, actively working for change, and promoting the common good. But he pointed out in this document that, in 2003, over 1 million abortions happened in America. And he talks a little further about human labor abuses, child labor abuses. And he goes on to say, and I thought this was very powerful, and it's the why this matters, why it matters how we as stewards of God's resources approach ethical investing. He says, how can institutional investors, their consultants, and asset managers turn a blind eye to the suffering, misery, and deprivations occasioned by certain of the companies in which they invest and yet claim to serve as witnesses of our faith? So with that backdrop of why this is so important, Nick, we're delighted to have you here. Nick is the interim president and chief investment officer at the Knights of Columbus Asset Advisors. In that role, he oversees $28 billion for this great Catholic institution. He is by training a fixed income specialist, particularly in mortgage-backed and asset-backed securities. He was co-head of fixed income, obviously does a lot of work in government and agencies as well. He has a BSBA in finance from Bryant University, and we're really delighted, Nick, that you could be with us today.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. So what are the USCCB's central expectations for Catholic institutional investors?
Sure, and thank you all for being here this morning, and thanks for having me. As we know, we're here to talk about Mensurum Bonum, but when we're focused on U.S. institutional investors, they really grab onto those USCCB guidelines as their guide star. Right, so it's very critical that we're here today to figure out how we could meld those two documents together. It is a lengthy document, but at the start it's pretty clear on what the high-level expectations are. One is that investors should evaluate each specific investment and how it coincides with Catholic social teaching. And I think one nuance that's important is I believe the document refers to companies and how compliant they are. As you mentioned, I come from the world of securitized finance, which it's like viruses, right? SPVs, buying, packaging loans, securities together, not in the sense, and they do cause a lot of sicknesses, as we know, but in the sense that they're neither alive nor dead in a way. They're an entity that exists as a conduit for financial transactions. I think it's important for all of us as investors, asset managers, consultants, to look at each individual investment, not just corporate debt, corporate equity, but what is the underlying thing that we're trying to achieve through that investment? Real estate, private equity, venture capital, all of those things still need to be evaluated, even though it may not show up as a publicly listed corporation. So that's one. The second is the stewardship aspect. And His Eminence referred to really the two driving forces last night at his remarks. We have to have the financial stewardship side to ensure that the capital of the institution lives on to fulfill its mission in perpetuity. And there it's to find that reasonable rate of return. It's not the maximum rate of return, it's reasonable. The document defines that as market or whatever's required to ensure that the mission continues on in perpetuity. So you're not expected to sacrifice your values for an extra 10 or 20 basis points of return. And then the last component of stewardship, as we know, is the social and ethical stewardship for justice and prudence. And really, that's where you refer to those three main topics: promoting the common good, avoiding harm, actively working for change. So, that's a long way of saying it's pretty clear at the front on what they expect, and then it gets into the nitty-gritty of how to do so.
Right. And speaking of that, so as an investment committee, how do you crystallize all that in the investment policy statement? I mean, that document, that guidance from the IPS is so important. How do you capture all of the USCCB guidance in the IPS?
Exactly, and that's to your point, the most critical starting point to really build out your policy to ensure it complies with Catholic social teaching, with the guidelines, with Mitzvah and Bonum. I'd encourage institutional investors, the consultants I work with them, to be as specific as possible in that document. We've seen examples, both good and bad. One, very broad, where it says, well, we just expect our investments to comply with the USCCB guidelines. The issue there is there's a lot of room for interpretation and gray area that some investment managers, especially if they're not aligned with the faith as their primary business, might take advantage of to squeeze out some extra return to make themselves look better. So we always encourage, list out the things you want from a screening side, from an engagement side, from a proxy voting side, just so everyone's on the same page with what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. So you brought up those three elements, and I want to build on that a little bit. So the screening, the exclusion, the engagement, we heard from Cardinal and others about dialogue, right? We've heard a lot about engaging. Father Seamus just mentioned that as well. And then proxy voting. So you mentioned all three. So why don't you build on how the Knights of Columbus implement all three areas?
Sure, and it's a constantly evolving facet, and what we believe sets us apart as a manager by taking each component to the next level to ensure it's really fulfilling the expectations of the guidelines and of the faith. On the screening side, we felt it's better for us to work with a partner who really understands what the goals of the screening are, who has the capabilities to handle all the data that flows into it. It's one thing to say, look at these big name brand companies, and we know some of them that we just don't want to invest in from the Catholic side, right? But what about all the other companies around the world? You really need that deep data analysis and the time to do so and the resources to do so to properly identify which ones should be excluded. So we work with a partner who's an expert on that, and their focus on coming at it from the faith side. As we know, there's plenty of screening providers that especially became popular with the rise of ESG. They'll create any sort of screen you want, but you really want someone who understands the faith and the guidelines to screen the right way.
So is this this ethical overlay, can they overrule the portfolio managers, or how does that get dealt with internally when the two are in disagreement?
Great question. So the way we do it, if it's on the screen list, the portfolio managers can say, hey, we don't believe this should be screened, this is why, and then we can sit down and have a discussion. We've run into a few examples where the screening picked up something that at the end of the day wasn't in conflict with social teaching. We all talked about it and it came off the list. Other scenarios where it gets into that gray area, especially in the world I come from, securitized finance, we sat down with our moral theologian we have on staff and just walked through the concept. Because from the investment side, we're all professionals in economics, finance, accounting, et cetera. We're not moral theologians. So we want to go to someone who has that expertise to make sure everything we're investing is compliant with the faith.
So just to press a little further on that, so if there is a dispute, though, that can't be resolved, in your shop, does the moral theologian have the final say,
Yes.
or the portfolio? Okay.
Yes, because our belief is it may be a great investment, right? We expect our team to be skilled enough to find something that can return just the same, but still being compliant with social teaching.
Great. So how do you report your progress? So we all have investment committees or investors that we answer to, obviously our own conscience that we have to answer to. So how do we report in a transparent and theologically sound way that we are fulfilling the obligations of USCCB and Mitzvah and Bonum?
Right, and that's where we work in a couple different ways with different clients who may have, some have more robust reporting requirements, which we encourage. Right, especially to go back to their investment committee, in the case of diocese, to the bishop or archbishop, to say, hey, this is what we've done from an investing standpoint, so we could prove to you we're doing what we say we're doing, especially when you have that robust IPS. On our side, we're constantly promoting how we're living the faith through everything we do. It's not just a business for us, as all of you in here know. You know what the Knights of Columbus stands for. You know what our members are doing all around the world. It's all part of the same ecosystem as an entity, as an enterprise. So again, that's how we really show that it's all just part of one big cycle for us.
Yeah, and let's build on that. I was going to finish with that, but one of the things I love about my work at Faith Investor Services, I'm a volunteer really, even though I'm the chairman and CEO, and all of the equity at our firm will be given to endow the church. So it's really fun. Similarly, Knights of Columbus, you are an extraordinary charitable organization. So both in terms of the manpower and the amount of money that you give away every year, it's unbelievable. And you, as the president and CIO, you oversee all the charitable giving for the Knights of Columbus. So how does that play in your own faith? And as a professional, how much joy do you derive from overseeing that part of the business?
Yeah, that's a great point. Because as we know, when you're in finance, coming up through the ranks, you spend a lot of time, long hours in the office, staring at Excel screens. Especially when the markets aren't going your way, it gets a little tough to be positive every day to come to work. But when you're working in an institution like Knights, you see all the good that we do in the world and all the value that is created from working with both for our members, their families on the insurance side, and all our partners on the asset management side. One thing we take pride in is that it's all in-house for us. We have our own investment management teams. So all the fees that are generated from managing these assets, they just go back and support that same mission. And our job at the asset management side is to continue to provide the financial resources for the Knights to do all the good that they do around the world.
Yeah, and I hope you all pay attention every so often to the amazing things that the Knights are doing, whether it's in Ukraine or in the Holy Land, I guess.
Just a couple weeks ago.
Just a few weeks ago. So this is a truly amazing organization. When you run into challenges then in implementing USCCB guidelines or Mensurum Bonum, can you give us an example or two where maybe there was a conflict and how you resolved it?
Yeah, I'd say one area we're really focused on now is the proxy voting side. Mm-hmm. So it was enlightening for me learning how the different proxy providers may or may not work the right way that we want them to. When you think about it, sure, we selected a template that they say is Catholic compliant, they vote. What we learned is that proxy companies, the big ones, we all know who they are, they could work with corporations to word corporate resolutions in a way that gets the result that management wants, right? So that's an area where if your proxy voting is being done by a firm that provides all sorts of different templates to people, they won't go the extra mile to make sure that the resolution is voted in the way that we want them to. So that's an area where we're really focused on strengthening what we're doing. And then the other point is building the collaboration, especially on the engagement side. Mm-hmm. As you know, think about huge corporations. It's tough to get a phone call if you have 1 share, 10 shares, 100 shares. But if we think about all working together as Catholic asset managers, consultants, investors, and pooling those resources, then it gets a lot easier to have that meeting. And it's the dialogue where we're not being a public relations terrorist, so to speak. It's about, hey, let's just sit down and we're investors. We want you guys to be successful, but you're doing something that we really aren't in love with. So if you stop doing it, we think you'll still have better returns and you'll make all the Catholics in the United States very happy.
Right. One of the things I like about our industry, but that I want to encourage us all, is to dialogue with each other. As you just said, when we bring our voices together and our capital, our combined capital together, we can have a bigger influence in changing corporate America and the culture out there. So it's important that we dialogue and that Father Seamus isn't working in his silo and you're working in yours and I'm in mine. We've got to do a better job, I think, as church of working together to lift our voices and our capital in unison to try and drive change and promote the common good.
The great thing about having a big 23-story tower in New Haven is we had room to build our own chapel on the 4th floor. So we have daily mass every day at 12 o'clock. And our team isn't entirely Catholic. But I could tell you that everyone on our team buys into the mission of what we're trying to do. Because even if you're not Catholic, if you're Christian or other faith, you understand the value of human dignity. And that we're all working towards promoting human dignity and ensuring protecting the dignity of all people around the world, not just Catholics or not just Christians. So I'd say we constantly enforce that with our team and provide examples of all the good the Knights does based on all their work. Right? It's not just the Supreme Knight who can take credit for everything we do, even though he does lead our firm and provides that great mission and Catholic difference. But everyone in the organization plays a part in ensuring that we can really drive home that protection of life, the value of human dignity, all around the world, as I said. So it's not just Catholics, but we're all bought into the mission. say we get down to evaluating 2 different companies to fill a little box in the portfolio. Well, let's look at them and see which one does the most good out of the 2, right? And that's the one you'll pick, because we expect the returns to be more or less the same. So you might as well invest in the company that goes the extra mile in terms of maybe providing welfare to the poor, or free services to the underprivileged. Another area is where, on the fixed income side, we just look for opportunities to add securities that at least result in some sort of positive good in society. An example of that, we have a decent chunk of investment in municipal housing bonds, right? So these are government authorities that promote low-income housing. Again, we think they're great returning securities, but we also know, hey, it's helping out housing in the United States, which we know is a humongous problem and will be for the foreseeable future. So I'd say it's cases like that where it's not a hard and fast rule, but it gets down to option A or option B. Pick the one that does the most good.
Great point, and I think it's incumbent on all of us, particularly because most of us are in the institutional world probably that are here at the conference, but it's important to remember that the average parishioner in the pews isn't probably thinking or maybe even aware of USCCB investment guidelines or Mensa Rambanum, right? And we have a huge educational role, but also back to transparency and reporting and how do we speak to the ethical impact we're having. It's important that we, as an industry, start telling that story better, both to educate parish priests as well as the laity in the pews, but also our institutional clients as well.
Yeah, see, that's a great point. I think Praxis put out a study end of last year. It was more geared towards retail. Only 21% of survey respondents said they've even heard about faith-based investing. In addition of the 50% of those who didn't said they would consider investing in alignment with their faith if they just knew more about it or how to do it. So the potential there on education is humongous.
Exactly. So one of the tremendous joys I have in my role at Faith Investor Services is I serve as a portfolio manager for the FIS Christian Stock Fund. It trades on the New York Stock Exchange under the symbol PRAY. And I got to tell you, when we were here in New York, and we were ringing the bell, and we saw Pray all over the New York Stock Exchange. That was really fun. Well, Nick has done a great job for us, and he has to travel later today, so I thought he could use the luggage tag that says Pray.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Very good.
This year's summit proved what's possible when faith shapes investment. We go further, uniting more Catholic leaders ready to invest with purpose, integrity, and grace. Shape the legacy, live the calling. Visit our website for the Catholic FI Alliance at catholicfi.com to learn more.